The New York Mets have made their first major addition to their starting rotation. It is confusing me and my co-host. Welcome in to the latest edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. Chris Schubert, Jack McKessie here with the special kind of side episode here. This will be a short little, our instant reactions. We've had a little bit of time to think about it. We are going to provide to you our dream off seasons that now, I guess, have to include this move that has already happened because the New York Mets have added a starting pitcher. They have added Frankie Montas on a 2-year, $34 million deal with an opt-out after year one. Jack, the video audience saw the shrug in the intro. How are you, my friend?
Chris, I usually say I'm doing well. I am a bit confused to start today's episode. That's the vibe that I am feeling right now with the addition of Frankie Montas. So we'll talk about it a little bit, but I'm confused for right now.
Yeah, a lot to unpack here from this move for the New York Mets, showing that they are aggressively pursuing starting pitching help for their rotation. We shouldn't be surprised by this. I think we are surprised by the name and the amount of dollars that he got, but we will unpack all of that here today on the show. But before we do that, got to tell you about Bet Online. They continue to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, NHL to UFC. Head on over to BetOnline today and don't forget to use promo code Bleav, that's BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. So 2 years, $34 million for Frankie Montas, and I'll just very quickly tell the story of how I learned this move. It was pretty late at night for me, even on the West Coast. It was a little past 9 o'clock, and on a Sunday, I have a kid that goes to school the next day. We're wrapping up the evening. I'm away from the computer. I'm away from social media. The football game was in hand. I was ready to shut it down, and I got a text message from my friend, and it was just, I think it was just with a bunch of dots on the end of it, I think is what it was, to Frankie Montas being signed to the New York Mets. And look, we knew going into this offseason the Mets were going to add multiple starting pitchers, and they were going to probably shop at the top end of this bucket: Corbin Burnes, Max Fried, Jack Flaherty, Sean Manaea. And they were also going to snoop around in the middle tier of this bucket, which is where I think Frankie Montas fits in. And then they are also going to sniff around the trade market as well to potentially add another starter, because even after the Montas signing, here's where the New York Mets rotation currently sits going into 2025. It is Kodai Senga, it is David Peterson, it is Frankie Montas, it is Tyler McGill, and it is Paul Blackburn. That's the rotation for the New York Mets going into 2025. So there are going to be a couple more names that get in here. Jack, I will pass the baton to you, my friend. I will let you take this wherever we want to go, because Frankie Montas is going to be a starting pitcher for our New York Mets.
Yeah, Chris, if you told me to make 2 to 3 guesses on which Scott Boras agent or which Scott Boras client would be one of the first signings that the Mets made this offseason, I don't think Frankie Montas would have even cracked the top 10. That might be an exaggeration, but it's just kind of a weird deal, just given some of the other free agents that are still on the market right now. A guy like Sean Manaea, I kind of had my eye on more, obviously, as someone who was more familiar with the team, who performed our ace, who performed better than Frankie Montas did, frankly, last season. So I'm going to, I guess, start by just kind of diving into Frankie Montas's numbers from the 2024 season. So he pitched for 2 different teams. He was the opening day starter for the Cincinnati Reds this year. So in total this season, he threw 150 and 2/3 innings, 93 and a third of which were with the Reds. He had a 4.84 ERA across both teams, 5.01 with the Reds, and then a 4.55 with the Brewers after the trade deadline. And 148 strikeouts, 66 walks, and a 240 batting average allowed across 2 teams. All of those numbers generally were better with the Brewers, which, if you're going to take away something positive out of this, you would probably have to say that the sign that he's trending upward over the back half of the 2024 season is a good thing. But it's just kind of weird. Like we were talking in the pre-show, Chris, like even at his best last year, over the final half of the season, it's a 4.55 ERA is less than impressive. And a piece like that in the Mets rotation, given how important some of the starting pitching performances were down the stretch, 4.55 ERA wasn't really going to cut it, or wouldn't have cut it for the 2024 Mets. So I'm really interested to see what David Stearns and Jeremy Hefner's vision is for Frankie Montas going forward.
I think there are multiple takeaways from what you just said. I think takeaway number one for me is they clearly aren't going to put this version of Frankie Montas on the mound in 2025. They Bleav in some level of tweaking that they can do, just like they did with Luis Severino, just like they did with Sean Manaea, that they think can get more out of Frankie Montas. My issue is I think there's a world of a difference between Sean Manaea, where he was entering free agency and signing with the New York Mets, with Luis Severino, and really the only question mark was, could the dude stay healthy? Because you had a resume that could have gotten him a starting job on every team in Major League Baseball, but the question was a team going to commit the dollars that it would take to sign Luis Severino, considering how often is he going to give you 30 starts? Those were the questions between those two guys. With Frankie Montas, he made 30 starts last year, but he is a roller coaster ride. You look at his Fangraphs page, it is a roller coaster ride. There's a 7 ERA, then there's a 3.5 ERA, then there's a 5 ERA, then there's a 2.6 ERA, and then there's a 4 ERA, and then it's 4.84. I mean, it is all over the place. People are like, oh, this is just the Sean Manaea deal. Please ask yourself, and this is not being critical of David Stearns, because again, I Bleav that there's a plan here, and I'm willing to see the plan through. And I actually, after hating the deal at first, I don't hate it as much, and I think I got to my place of reasoning with it, and it was, Jack, it's the thing I texted you last night of how I'm rationalizing the deal in my head, but that only is, and I'll explain that rationale in a second, that rationale only exists if there's more moves for the New York Mets. That's the only way that rationale takes place. But I just, Sean Manaea was coming off of making a bunch of starts at the end of the season for San Francisco and showing that he was a different pitcher. He had a different pitch mix. He was doing different stuff. And then he got to the New York Mets, and it was a 2-year deal with an opt-out, and I think that's what everybody's clinging to compare this to Frankie Montas' deal. But he then changed himself in the middle of the season. Now, maybe Frankie Montas will be that exact same person, but I look at the under-the-hood numbers on StatCast. I look at the stuff plus numbers. I just don't see it. I don't see the same fire that I felt about Sean Manaea getting signed, because they made that signing and I'm like, oh, he was really good at the end of San Francisco. They see something there. Now they clearly see something in Frankie Montas. I just don't think we see the same thing. This is a guy that signed a 1-year, $16 million year contract with the Reds last year, got traded, went to the Brewers, and after this past season that he had, the New York Mets said, not only are we going to give you a raise, but we're also going to give you a multi-year commitment. What about his 2024 campaign gave you the inclination that he deserved a raise and deserved a multi-year commitment? Now, this is the going rate for starting pitchers. Matthew Boyd signed a 2-year, $29 million contract, $14.5 million a year for a 33-year-old pitcher who made 8 starts last year coming back from Tommy John surgery. So I get it. It's the going rate for starters. I'm not going to kill David Stearns for it, but this is where it's okay for me. This is where I can get comfortable with this deal, and it's the thing I said to Jack last night. When they signed Jose Quintana to a 2-year, $26 million contract. So $13 million a season. They paid a guy $13 million a year to be their number 4, number 5 starter, to be their innings eater at the back end of the rotation. If you were going to convince me that, okay, in 2024, because they signed that deal with Quintana, after the 2021 season, 2022 season, a couple years ago. If you want to tell me
22.
And I know this is a buzzword in other circles, maybe not so much in baseball circles, but if you want to tell me that there's starting pitching inflation, and now the number 4, number 5 starter for a rotation, instead of costing $13 million a season, costs $17 million a season, then I can get on board with signing Frankie Montas if you told me he is the Jose Quintana replacement. But guess what? You still need a Sean Manaea replacement. You still need a Luis Severino replacement. And by the way, I think you need another starter in this rotation as well. So this is fine. This can't be the major offseason pitching acquisition, and then we're looking at a bunch of other guys that round out the depth. If Frankie Montas is your 1-for-1 Jose Quintana replacement, I can get on board. There's more potential in Montas than there was with Quintana. I trust in the pitching lab and Jeremy Hefner in this process to get more out of Montas, although I don't know what's left there, because he throws a sinker. He doesn't throw a sinker very well. His best pitch is his splitter. So I don't know what they're going to do. They clearly have a plan. That's okay. We'll see it through. But if you told me he's the Jose Quintana replacement along with the other moves, I can get there. That's why I won't fully judge this until the offseason is over. But here in the moment, man, if $17 million is the going rate for Frankie Montas, what does Corbin Burns want? What does Max Fried want? What does Sean Manaea want? That's where my brain immediately went after seeing this deal. Frankie Montas got how much? Because Sean Manaea is probably a $30 million pitcher then at that point.
Yeah, the Montas deal kind of fell in line with the Yusei Kikuchi deal with the Angels, and it was kind of a shocking revelation about what the starting pitcher market is going to look like this offseason. For me, Chris, I think when I look at Frankie Montas and what he did for Milwaukee, mostly, some for Cincinnati, even though he was Cincinnati's opening day starter, when I look at what Montas brings to the 2025 Mets, I don't even know if he's the Quintana replacement so much as he's like the Tyler McGill or Christian Scott replacement, someone as your 5 or 6 starter in a potential 6-man rotation with Kodai Senga coming back. Because when I look at the Mets' current starting rotation of all the guys you mentioned before, and when I look at what they had last year in 2024 or this past year, they need guys who are still better than what Montas was in 2024. Guys like Quintana, who pitched better than Frankie Montas in 2024, sure. Or guys like Severino or Manaya, who pitched much better than Montas in 2024. Like, we talked about this last night. There should be other names on this free agent market that the Mets are looking to add in the starting rotation, because Montas at best to me is a 5 starter. And that's what concerns me about his deal is the value and, you know, what he is going to add to a team that already so desperately needs depth past the number 1, number 2 spot that Senga is going to fill. So I just don't see how there's a future for the 2025 rotation without several more impressive pieces. But with that, how much money is going to be invested in that, I don't know.
You look across the starting pitching market, and I think this is what the Montas deal kind of put into frame for me is, and it's not the be-all, end-all, but Fangraphs has their crowdsourced contracts, and they put that on the tracker. Kikuchi got more than what the crowdsource said. Michael Wacha got more, or just about the same as the crowdsource. Blake Snell got more than the crowdsource. Montas got more than the crowdsource. Matthew Boyd got more than the crowdsource. What you're seeing is there is a premium on just guys that can throw innings and are somebody that you can roll out there every 5th day. So what does a Corbin Burnes get? Because the crowdsource is 6/180, a $30 million AAV. I think that's coming in too low after what Frankie Montas got. Max Fried is 5/125, $25 million AAV. I think that's too low. If $17 million was the going rate for Frankie Montas, you're telling me Max Fried is only $8 million a year more? Now, I know Max Fried's going to get a longer-term contract than Montas. Montas has an opt-out, and even if he stinks, it's another 1 year at $17 million. And in baseball, for Steve Cohen, that's nothing. That's, you know, couch cushion money. I get it. But if the Mets are going to then shop in the Sean Manaea waters, in the Max Fried waters, maybe even the Corbin Burnes waters, and we know they're shopping in the Juan Soto waters. We know that that is out there. I worry at the end of the day, and this is not so much a shot at Montas as it is more so I got to see this picture. I got to see this puzzle get put together, because at $17 million for Montas, I don't know what other levers the Mets can pull. Now, they have a lot of money, but I don't think they're that eager to spend exactly what they spent last year. And if Soto's going to cost you between 45 and 50, probably closer to 50, you just paid 17 for Montas. That's $67 million of your 170 that you have. Now we're already down to about 100. And again, I don't know if they're going to want to spend all that 100. So I just worry about this game of musical chairs. And this team was 2 games away from going to the World Series. And what was the thing that stopped them? Their starting pitchers ran out of gas. And let's see. Maybe they surprise me and they sign Max Fried. Maybe they surprise us and they sign Corbin Burnes. Maybe they surprise us and they trade for a Zach Gallen or one of the other pitchers that could potentially be available. Garrett Crochet all of a sudden is here in New York. Okay, then my appetite changes. It's why I'm reserving judgment on the bigger picture, and I'm not necessarily criticizing Montas himself. And again, if Montas is the number 4 starter for this team going into the year, I feel a lot differently about it. But it was just the number made me think, man, this market is a lot more expensive than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, to kind of put this in another context, when I look at what the starting pitching market has looked like so far this offseason, it reminds me a lot of switching it to NFL free agency when Christian Kirk signed his extension, or when Christian Kirk signed his deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Right. And there was a kind of sentiment, well, if Christian Kirk can make however much it was, $24-25 million a year, guys like Tyreek Hill, guys like Devonta Adams started to ask themselves, why can't we make, $30 million a year? It reset the entire market. And I feel like so far this offseason with the Montas deal and the Kikuchi and the Snell deals, that the whole MLB landscape is kind of being reactionary to the idea that starting pitching depth is so crucial, especially after what the Dodgers were just able to do because they had that much starting pitching depth and win the World Series despite losing a rotation and a half worth of starting pitchers. Now, all of these free agent starting pitchers hitting the market realize, hey, we can charge you more for our talents. We can reset the market, so to speak, and let guys like Corbin Burns, Max Fried near the top of the market make even more money. And the domino effect just kind of goes from there. And to that end, if all of those top free agent names, like the Burns, like the Frieds, what have you, are going to be asking for a significant amount of money in free agency now because of these deals for Montas, Kikuchi, Snell, etc., it really makes you wonder how much more the Mets will look into the free agent market versus the trade market. And you already brought that up with guys like Zach Gallen, with guys like Garrett Crochet. I feel now with this Montas deal and with the way that the free agent starting pitching market is shaking out, the Mets are going to be a lot more active in the trade market potentially to find some of those starting pitching, additions to their rotation, because they are not going to want to spend that kind of money on free agent pitchers by themselves when there are so many other spots like outfield, like, first base, like designated hitter that the Mets still need to fill.
Yeah, I think where I'd like to wrap this is by having this conversation. Everybody knows how I feel about Walker Buehler, and he is one of the top targets that I want the New York Mets to go after. Now, they could end up with Walker Buehler, right? Because if you got Buehler and Montas, that would kind of be like getting Sevy and Quintana, right? That would be one-for-one replacements. And that's the way I'm going to view this is these are the players that the Mets need to replace in their rotation, and these are the people that I think fit into those roles. But if it was one or the other, I'd give the 234 to Walker Buehler before I'd give it to Frankie Montas. I'd give the 234 to Shane Bieber before I'd give it to Frankie Montas. If your whole thing is, the Mets, they're really good at finding this upside. They're really good at taking a guy, tweaking him, and making him better. Frankie Montas is 32. Give me Walker Buehler, who's 30 and could have some Cy Youngs in his back pocket if he was just consistent and healthy. Give me Shane Bieber, who was one of the best pitchers in baseball when he was healthy, with this Mets tutelage that everybody thinks is so grand. Now, they still have rotation spots. They could very, very well end up with Walker Buehler or Shane Bieber. But if we get to the end of the road here, and I want to just put this on the record so that nobody says, well, you didn't say this at the time. If Walker Buehler gets less than Frankie Montas, or a similar deal to Frankie Montas, and it's not with the Mets, if Shane Bieber gets a deal that the Mets could have given, I'm going to be pretty upset, because I think those are two better uses of this whole, we'll bring you in here, we'll tweak you, we'll get you into the pitching lab, and we'll make you a better version of yourself, like they did with Manaea, like they did with Sevy. And I'm looking and I see Shane Bieber. The crowd source is 240. I'd rather give Bieber 240 than give Montas 234. For Buehler, it's the crowd source number. I just had it here for a second. Hold on. Was 115. I'd go 230 for Buehler before I'd go 234 for Montas. Now, if you tell me you get both of those guys, that's fine. And again, there's also an avenue here where the New York Mets end up with Garrett Crochet and Roki Sasaki, and I shut my mouth and I say, in Stearns we trust. There's a world where that plays out, and so we're going to allow this to play out, but we have to have this check-in point as these deals happen, and my instant gut reaction is, I don't think this deal is going to work out the way the Mets think it's going to work out. I just don't see anything under the hood that makes me feel good. Like the StatCast numbers for Montas, the Stuff Plus numbers for Montas do not inspire a ton of confidence for me. Like his best pitches, according to Stuff Plus last year, were his splitter, his slider, and his cutter. His fastball and his sinker were the worst they've been in his career, and they were 83s, with 100 being the norm. They were both 83s. Like his fastball's not good. His sinker isn't very good. He basically is a 3-pitch pitcher: cutter, splitter, slider. All right, if you can really harness those 3 pitches with Jeremy Hefner and company, that's fine. But I think you're going to need something else. You're going to need to offer something else. And I don't know. In Stearns we trust. There's clearly a plan here. The sticker shock of $17 million a year for Frankie Montas on a 2-year deal, when the dude signed 1 year for 16, got traded to Milwaukee, and had a 4.84 ERA, when the under the hood stuff doesn't have a high K rate. His walk rate's really, not very good. He doesn't have great extension. His barrel, there's nothing. There's nothing that I can look at on his StatCast under the hood that says, he's really elite at this. He doesn't have that. Even with Manaea, when they signed Manaea, he had an above average K rate. He had an above average extension. Actually, it was elite extension. There were things that I can say, okay, that's what the Mets see. That's what the Mets are going to try to to bring more out of. Frankie Montas' best trait under the hood last year was his fastball velocity was 70th percentile. That's it. That's the top thing that graded out. So, I know there are a lot of people out there that like the move. They think it's fine. I think the position of this show, and I'll speak for Jack here, and Jack will correct me if I'm wrong, if at the end of the day Frankie Montas is the Jose Quintana replacement in the rotation because of the other things they do, I'm on board. I'm fine. It's not my money, not my problem. I just worry that with this price, what's the price on these other guys, and is it going to make financial sense with all of the other things we know the Mets are going to try to do for them to pull all of this off? I don't know. Time will see. But the New York Mets make a big splash. They add to their rotation. There's a lot more work to be done. We wanted to bring you this quick little reaction episode. We got a little bit more time to think about it. We could have done a show last night, but I had to sleep on it, had to let this move marinate for a little bit. So we'll be back later this week with our dream offseason that now has to work around Frankie Montas taking up one of the rotation spots for the New York Mets. Jack, where can everybody follow you on social media?
Yeah, they can follow me on X at JF McKessie. But Chris, I have been more active these days over on Bluesky.
You're on the Bluesky too. Nice.
So you can find me over on Bluesky. It's also JF McKessie. I believe it's .bsky.app or something like that.
.social.
But if you just look me up on Bluesky at JF McKessie, you should be able to find me there. I've been leaving a lot of my takes on the Mets offseason as well as, kind of this NFL football season so far. So if you're interested in any of that, please come over to Bluesky, join the rebellion, and we could see how things go from there.
You're like in Star Wars, joining the rebellion. You can follow me on Twitter at Chris Schubert _. I am also on Bluesky. My handle a little different, CR Schub, so CRSCHUBE .bluesky.social. So you can join me over there. I have been putting a lot more of my Mets thoughts over there with the baseball community, but I put them on both. It just depends on what tab is open at the time that that the thought pops into my head. Right? That's normally how it works. Yes, Jack.
I just want to add two quick things to close the book on Montas here. First of all, I want to contextualize that with the reason that I feel like we're a little more down on this move than we were last year with Sean Manaea and Jose Quintana. It's important to remember what we expected for the Mets in 2024, right? It was maybe play for a playoff spot, maybe reach that wild card, maybe win one game, maybe win a series in the playoffs, right? Going into 2024, having a move that was more experimental and you hope that they can find something out of a guy like Manaea and Severino, who have impressive numbers under the hood, but have a lot of question marks elsewhere, made a lot of sense. They felt like a coin toss, but if Stearns hit on either one of them, it would be success and, maybe shape the future of what the 2025 Mets would look like. Now that we know that this team with the 2024 talent already on the roster was capable of almost reaching the World Series, making a move like Frankie Montas, which is a bigger coin flip with, I'd say, the odds further stacked against the Mets because there's a lot less impressive stuff underneath the hood. It's harder for us to rationalize that move because it doesn't really align with what it seems like the Mets are trying to do in 2025, especially with, as we've talked about it in our past episodes, the amount of money coming off of the books, the amount of money that's freed up for the Mets to spend with the kind of players that we assume the Mets would be in on in free agency. Frankie Montas felt like a player that another team would sign as their 3 starter going into 2025.
The Angels.
Sure. But the reason that it's so shocking for us in the context of 2024 is because we thought, Corbin Burns would be the guy the Mets would go after first free agency, or Walker Buehler or Shane Bieber as guys who have impressive stuff, but will require a bit of an investment in monetarily and in the pitching development sense to make the most out of them. Frankie Montas, we're not really sure what his future is going to look like. But my second point here is it's going to be interesting, and I appreciate David Stearns, I guess, in a way, that this is one of the first big moves that the Mets have made this offseason because it's really going to contextualize going forward when we start to see how the free agent market shapes up, how this move will age, I guess, a little bit sooner. We will see sooner how the market will be shaped around deals like this. Like if Buehler ends up getting, 1 or 2 years at 25 a year because of deals like this, then I'll be like, okay, the Montas deal makes sense in hindsight. But now that we have this so early, we're going to be able to see what Stearns and Cohen kind of are able to do over the rest of the offseason and what the rest of the free agent starting pitching market is going to look like. So 2 interesting notes. I think, it's a weird move we are still both kind of reeling from it, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm
But
not in on it for
it's
sure.
gonna be
Really
an interesting offseason still. I think there's a lot of stuff still to come, and I think Montas is probably on the kind of lower end of moves that the Mets are going to make. At least both of us are hoping so.
Yeah, Frankie Montas is just one small piece in what is a big puzzle for the Mets this offseason. It was just a peculiar state move and place for David Stearns to start. And yeah, I think the 2025 New York Mets need more sure things. And if you are going to bet on not sure things, if you were going to bet on taking these flyer type deals, I would have just much rather been in the Walker Buehler, Shane Bieber bucket than I would have been in the Frankie Montas bucket. I think that's really where I come down on this, is that I like the bet because you've shown that you're really good at this. That's just not the bet I would have made. I would have picked a different player. So we'll see how the market plays out. And listen, we say it on the show all the time, kind of in joking, but we probably need a shirt made. In Stearns, we trust. I mean, he's earned the benefit of the doubt here, even though we'll push back on the show and say, I'm not really sure about it. He's earned the benefit of the doubt. I'm not going to all of a sudden, burn all my Met stuff and say, oh, the team's going to stink this year because Frankie Montas is going to start every fifth day. All right, not the move I would make, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I didn't think Jose Quintana could start meaningful games for the New York Mets down the stretch in 2024, and here we were. He had a 7-game stretch that was the most important of the season. So things happen. You just have to kind of ride it out. So we'll be back later this week with our dream off-season episode. We appreciate you joining us here for this emergency pod as the New York Mets sign Frankie Montas. So that's going to do it for us here on this edition of the show. Appreciate you joining us. Rate, review, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Just search up Jack McKessie on YouTube. You can see the video version of the show as well. And we will be back later in the week with our dream off-season. See you, everybody. Let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.